Marjorie Hallowe's stood just inside the door of the long dining room with her sleeves turned back to the elbow and the smell of the kiln still in her hair. 40 people sat down the length of the table, and the candles had been lit twice over, once at 6 and again at 9 when the first set guttered. Buyers had come from Worcester and 2 from the borough, and their coats were better than the plate they ate from. On the cloth in front of Mr. Standish lay a small linen bag with its mouth folded back, the way a man folds back a bag when he wants the room to look inside it. Nobody had asked her to come up from the oast. She had come because Amos Yeo had sent a boy running, and the boy had said only that they had her name in their mouths. The Dowager Duchess of Corvedale set down her glass and looked at the woman in the doorway with the hop dust grey to her elbows and spoke in the voice that carried to the end of any room she had ever been in. "She is not what we ordered," his mother said. The Duke put both hands flat on the cloth on either side of his plate. Then he pushed back his chair, and the legs of it barked on the boards, and he stood up. 6 weeks before that, the carrier had set her down at the top of the lane with her box and a roll of sacking on the second Tuesday in August, in weather that had not broken since the middle of July. She stood in the white dust and looked down at the valley the way a person looks at a job. 14 acres of hop garden lay under her, the bines up their poles and tied and gone over the top, the alleys green-dark and smelling of resin and warm earth. Beyond them stood the oast, 2 round kilns, brick, with the long barn between. One kiln had its cowl on, white, turning a little. The other had no roof at all. It stood open to the sky, black inside to the height of a man, and the brick above the fire hole had gone the colour of a burnt loaf. She looked at that one for a while. Then she picked up her box and went down. Amos Yeo met her at the yard gate with a tally book under his arm and his weight all on one leg. "They said a man was coming," he said. "They said that to me as well," Marjorie said. "In a letter." "Ah." He looked at her boots, which were a working woman's boots and had been resoled twice. "You'll be the one that wrote from Kent, then." 11 years in Kent, 6 of them on the floor at Bearstead with my own kiln under me. And you signed your name with a letter and a stop. "I signed it the way it is written on my indenture," she said. "Nobody asked me a question I did not answer." The old man laughed once without any pleasure in it and jerked his chin at the burnt roundel. "You'll want to know about that." "Not this minute," said Marjorie. "This minute I want to know where the water is." There was a man on the roof of the pickers' shelter at the top of the yard, laying a course of tiles in his shirt-sleeves with the sun on his back. He came down the ladder when he saw her, and came across, and she took him for the carpenter until Amos Yeo straightened up as far as his hip would let him. He was tall and burnt brown down to the collar and white above it, and his hands, when he took her name paper from her and read it standing up, were a working man's hands with lime in the cracks. "Hallowe's," he said. "Corvedale. You are 3 days earlier than the letter said." The letter was written by a clerk who has never stood on a drying floor. "Your hops will be ready before your letter thought they would." "Will they?" "I will tell you on Friday," she said. "There is a thing I say first, before I take a place, and I say it to the man who pays me, so that it is said and not written." She put her box down on the cobbles so that her hands were empty. "While there is fire in that kiln, the kiln is mine, not yours, not your mother's, not your buyer's, not any man's who is standing in the yard shouting about a wagon. You may put me off the place any hour of any day, and I will go without a word, but you may not give me an order on those stairs." The yard was quiet enough to hear the cowl turn a quarter and stop. Something went across the Duke's face and was gone, and Amos Yeo looked hard at the tally book under his arm. "Understood," said the Duke. The Dowager Duchess received her in the morning room the next day at 11 o'clock, with the shutters half over against the heat and a letter open on the table, and did her the courtesy of speaking plainly, which Marjorie had not expected and was glad of. "We wrote to a factoring house for a master dryer," she said. We were sent a name. We were not sent a woman. No, madam, nobody sends a woman. They send her when there is nobody else and the hops are on the poles. You are frank? It saves a second conversation. The dowager turned the letter over with one finger. She was 61 and thin and had buried a husband and 2/3 of an income, and she had the particular hardness of a woman who has been told what the house needs since she was 19. You will understand that this family cannot afford an experiment. My son has a name in this county which is at present only a name, and a hop garden which has not paid since the year the oast burnt. If the crop fails again, he sells land. If he sells land, he sells the tenants with it. That is what stands behind my rudeness, and I will not pretend to be less rude in order to look kinder. That is the plainest thing anyone has said to me since Ashford, said Marjorie. May I go into the garden? They went, the three of them, the Duke coming down the alley from the other end with a pole on his shoulder. The bines were up over the top wires and hanging in curtains, and the light came green through them, and the smell in an alley in August is not like any other smell there is. Marjorie reached up and took a cone in her fingers without pulling it and turned it. Then she opened it with her thumbnail, the way a woman opens a purse. Look here, she said. Not at the outside. The outside will lie to anybody. Look at the yellow. The Duke bent his head. Inside the opened cone, at the root of every petal, sat a fine dust the colour of a lemon going over to gold. That is the lupulin. That is the whole of what your buyer pays for, and the rest is packing. In June it is pale as butter. When it turns that gold you have about 6 days, and when it turns the colour of a new penny you have lost your money and there is nothing on earth to be done about it. She rubbed it between finger and thumb and held her hand under his face. Smell that. Bitter. Clean bitter. Next week it will be a hard smell like a cupboard, and feel the tip. She squeezed a cone flat and let it spring. Papery, and it comes back. That is a hop, 3 days from picking. Your steward's letter said the 24th. If these stand to the 24th in this weather, they will shatter on the bine, and your pickers will bring you rubbish in a poke and swear it grew that way. Monday then, said the Duke. Monday, and I want the floor cloth off the laths tonight and out in the yard where I can see the light through it, and I want to know what is in the fuel store, and I want the firehole steps mended, because they are rotten and somebody is going to go through them at 2 in the morning with a shovel in his hands. The Dowager Duchess said, This is not settled. No, madam, said Marjorie. Monday is settled. I am not. She slept that night in the Oastman's lodging. 1 room over the store, with the door to the barn at one end and a window at the other, empty 3 years. There was a bed frame and no bed, and a swallow dead in the grate, and the whole place smelled of old hops, which is a sweet smell and a sad one, like a room where somebody has been ill and got better and gone away. She lay on her own blankets on the boards and listened to the empty roundel next to her, where the wind came down through the open roof and went round the brick and came out at the fire hole with a long sound. Picking began on the Monday with the bell at 5:30 and 460 people in the gardens by 7. They came from 3 parishes and off 2 trains, families out of the Black End of Worcester with their bedding, and the same tribe of women who had come every September for 30 years and who sang the same 4 songs badly. The bines came down off the poles with a hook on a long ash pole, and the women stripped them into the bins standing, talking all the while, and the cones went into the bins like snow going into a drift. The measurer went along the row with his bushel basket, and Amos Yeo tallied at the end of it, and the green hops went up to the Oast in pokes on a wagon that made the run 11 times before dinner. Marjorie lit her fire at 4 in the morning and did not put it out for 19 days. There is a way it is done, and it is not a mystery, but it must be done and not talked about. She laid the fire narrow at first, charcoal on the bars and drawn up until it burned without flame or smoke, because smoke in the load is a taint no buyer will forgive and no washing will take out. She sent Ned up the outside stair with the pokes, and she took them on the floor herself, and she spread the green hops on the horsehair cloth with the scuppet, which is a wooden shovel like a great paddle, and she spread them 10 inches deep and level as a table, because a shallow place dries first and burns while the deep place is still wet. Then she stood in the heat and waited for the sweat. Green hops do not begin by drying. They begin by giving up their water, and it comes off them as steam and rises through the load and hangs in the top of the roundel and goes out at the cowl, and while that is happening the load is doing nothing but getting wet on top. There is an hour of it. A dryer who loses her nerve in that hour and pulls the fire up will scorch the underside of the load and never know it until the sample is cut, and by then it is somebody's whole year. So she sat on the top step with the door in the wall open and the heat coming past her face, and she did not touch it. "How do you know when it's done?" said Ned from the stair the second night. "Come up, and I will show you." "I'll not come up there." "Then you will not know," she said, and after a minute he came up as far as the top step and no further. She scooped a handful out of the middle of the load, down to her wrist, and held it out flat on her palm. "Take a cone, bend the stem, not the petals, the stem, the strig, this bit here." He bent it. It gave and came back. "That is wet. When it is dry, it snaps like a straw, and the seed comes out hard, and the whole handful will feel like—" she cast about, "like feathers, and it rustles when it goes back on the floor. There, listen to it." She let the handful fall. "It has not got that sound yet. That is another 3 hours." "How many hours does it want altogether?" 9 to 12. Never the same twice. Wind changes, load changes, weather in the hop when it came off the pole changes. That is why the man on the floor is not a servant, Ned, and it is why he does not leave the floor, and it is why he does not do what he is told at 2 in the morning by anybody at all. Ned looked at his boots for a while. "I carried the charcoal," he said. "That night. I was 17. I've not been up those stairs since, and I'll not go up them for you." "Then carry the charcoal," said Marjorie, "and I will be up the stairs, and neither of us has to say another word about it." "Right," said Ned. And then, "Mrs., that cloth wants a patch at the north side by the wall." "I know it does. Fetch me the twine when it's light." She reported to the Duke each night at 11 in the estate office, because there was no steward and had not been one for 2 years, and because the pockets and the tallies had to be agreed by somebody who could be held to them. The first night he had the books out and a candle and his coat off, and they went through the bushels and the fuel and what the pickers were owed, and she gave him a figure for the day's drying, and he wrote it down. It took 18 minutes, and neither of them sat. 410 bushels, he said. "Is that good?" "It is what it is. Ask me on the last day." "How much of it is money?" "Ask the man in the borough, he will lie to you. Ask me, and I will tell you what leaves this yard and whether I would buy it." "And would you?" "Not yet," said Marjorie. "Good night, Your Grace." Amos Yeo was sitting on the step of the burnt roundel one dinner hour with a length of bine twine in his hands, splicing it badly because his fingers had gone. Marjorie sat down on the step below him with her bread. "You'll want to know," he said. It was the same sentence he had used at the gate, and he had been carrying it about for 11 days. "I will hear it if it is yours to say." "It's mine." He looked out at the gardens with his jaw working. "My son had this kiln, Hob, 38, and better on a floor than I ever was, and he could tell the hour by the smell of the load. 3 years ago, come Thursday, there was a buyer's man in the yard wanting the pockets by the Friday because he had a wagon and a boat and a price that would fall on the Monday. The crop was late. The house was in debt then, and it is in debt now. Go on. His Grace came up the stairs at 2 in the morning. Not the old Duke, this one, 3 months in the title, and his father's debts on the table in front of him. He said, 'Put another 6-inch on the floor and pull the fire up, we'll have 2 loads in one.' And my Hob said no, and said it twice, and said it in words I'd not repeat to a woman. And then his Grace said it again. And it wasn't a request the second time. And Hob was a servant on a place his father was born on. So he done it." The cowl on the good roundel turned a quarter behind them. The load went at 4. Cloth first, and then the laths, and the whole floor come down into the fire hole and hob with it. His Grace pulled him out, went in twice and pulled him out and broke his own arm doing it, for what that's worth, and my son lived 9 days and knew us for 6 of them. He put the twine down. There's them that say the Duke's not to blame, for it was a foul cowl and a wind that backed. And there's them that says a man in a kiln is under the man that pays him. I've heard all that. I'll tell you what I know. My son said no, and then a man told him twice, and my son is in the ground. Marjorie said nothing for a while, which is a thing she was better at than most. Does he speak of it? He has never said one word about it to me from that day to this, said Amos Yeo. He mended my roof with his own hands the winter after. Never said a word then neither. There's men that talk and men that carry bricks, and I'd have took the talk, but nobody asks me. That night she came up the outside stair at midnight and found her lodging door rehung on new hinges, planed, closing sweetly where it had dragged, with a bolt fitted on the inside of it. Nobody was in the yard. The window that had been stuffed with a sack had been reglazed. She stood in the middle of the room and did not touch anything for a minute, and then she went and shot the bolt back and forth twice, and then she went down to the fire. He came to the burnt roundel 2 evenings later with a barrow, because she had begun clearing it in her off hours, 1 barrow at a time, and had got about 1/3 of the fallen brick out. He took up the shovel without asking her whether he might, and they worked at the black rubble until it was too dark to see, and hardly spoke at all. There was a flaw here, he said once. There will be again. Not this year. No, said Marjorie, not this year. And she took the other handle of the barrow because it was overloaded, and they carried it out between them. The night the wind dropped altogether, she had a light load on and an easy fire, and the Duke came up the outside stair at 11 with bread and cold bacon in a cloth and a stone bottle of cider under his arm, and sat down on the top step and stayed 4 hours. Is that thing on the roof a cowl or a hat? He said. It is a cowl. My father called it a hat. Your father was a duke and could call it what he liked. It is a cowl. There is a vane on it, and the vane keeps its back to the wind, and it draws. If it sticks, the wind gets down inside instead of pulling out, and then the draught comes back down the roundel, and the fire smokes into the load, and the whole floor is ruined and smells like a chimney. And when it sticks, somebody goes up and unsticks it, said Marjorie. Eat your bacon. The cat came up the stairs sideways in the way cats do when they think nobody is watching, and lay down on the warm boards of the cooling floor with its legs out straight. That is not a farm cat, said Marjorie. That cat has an income. That cat has the freehold. She was here before I was. She sleeps on my hops. Turn her off. I turn her off 11 times a night. She has the freehold, as you say. She poured the cider into the 2 cups he had brought. Tell me what these are. Go on. There are only 2 things growing in your gardens, and one of them is nettles. That is a hop. That is a nettle. It is a small hop. It is a nettle, and you have 14 acres and a title, and any woman in that bottom garden could have told you at 4 years old. She was laughing at him, and it was not a thing she had done out loud in front of anybody for a long time. What variety are your hops? Green ones. Goldings. They are Goldings, every pole of them, and your grandfather planted them, and they are a small, tight cone with a short strig, and they have been the making of this valley. Goldings, he said. Say it again. Goldings. And if I said Goldings in front of a man from the borough, would I sound like a man who knew his business? You would sound like a man who had learned 1 word, said Marjorie, and he would ask you a second question, and you would say green ones. He laughed. It came out of him badly, in pieces, like a man laughing with a broken rib, and then he stopped and looked at the cat as if the cat had done it. Say the thing about the yellow again, he said. The dust. The lupulin. That. I want to have it right. So she told him again, and then she told him about the year at Bearstead, when the rain came the day the picking finished. and about a dryer at Yalding who dried by taste and put a hop in his mouth every hour of his life, and had no teeth left at 50, and he told her about the picker's shelter roof, and the 4 separate men who had told him it could not be tiled by one person, and the cider went down, and at 3 in the morning she got up and turned the load, and he sat where he was and watched her do it, and said nothing at all. Dorcas Bicknell came to the oast on the 11th morning with her hands wrapped in 2 rags that had been a petticoat. Hop picking takes the skin off. The bine is rough, and the resin blacks the fingers and gets into every crack, and by the 2nd week the hands of a woman who picks for her bread are things that would frighten a doctor. "They said you'd got something," she said in the doorway, not coming in. "Sit on the step there where the light is." Marjorie unwound the rags and did not say anything about the state of what was underneath, and washed them and put on the salve she made herself out of lard and beeswax and marigold, and bound them with clean linen off her own roll, 2 fingers separate and the thumb free so the woman could still work. "I can pay for the cloth Saturday." "There is no cloth to pay for." "I'm not a beggar." "No," said Marjorie, "you are a woman who has picked 11 bushels a day for 11 days and has hands like a hedge. Keep still." Dorcas Bicknell watched her own hands being wrapped by somebody else. She was 44 and had come down out of Worcester every September since she was 9. "My boy's in London," she said suddenly. "He's a good boy. He don't write, but he's a good boy, and he's got a place in a brewery, which is a thing I laugh at considering. I says to him, 'You'll be drinking what I picked.' That is a fair joke. He don't think so." She turned her bandaged hands over. "That's the first time in 30 years anybody in a yard's touched my hands except to look how many bushels was in 'em." She stood up quickly. "There, now I've said something soft, and I'll be all day getting over it. Come Wednesday and I will do them again." "I might," said Dorcas Bicknell, and came Wednesday and Saturday and every 3rd day after. The Duke saw that from the barn door, and did not go in and did not speak of it. He stood there a while after she had gone back to the gardens. What he felt was not complicated, and he had no practice in it. He was ashamed that a woman had picked in his gardens for 30 years, and he did not know her name, and he was glad, in a way that took him by the throat, that somebody on his place had a pot of salve and the sense to use it. He saw it another time, later, when she stopped a wagon in the lane and took the other end of a poke off a girl who was carrying it wrong, and walked it up the hill with her and left her at the top and went back down without waiting to be thanked. He thought about that all evening. He thought that he had been raised in a house where things were done for people from a distance, by letter, through an agent, and that he had never once in his life picked up the other end of anything until this summer, and that he had begun to do it because he had watched somebody else do it first. On the 15th night, the wind backed into the northeast at 1:30 in the morning, and the cowl did not turn. Marjorie knew it before she knew it, the way anybody knows a thing in a trade. The sound in the roundel changed. The draught that should have been pulling steadily up past her face slackened, and then came back down at her, and the smell of the fire, which should never reach the floor at all, came up through the cloth thin and grey, and sat in the load. She was down the inside stair and out into the yard in her stockinged feet. "Ned, Ned, get up and bring the long rake and the rope." The vane on the cowl stood square to the wind, jammed on its bearing, and the wind was pushing down the throat of the roundel and shoving the smoke back into 42 bushels of half-dried hops, and there were another 60 bushels of green in pokes in the barn that had come off the bine at 8 that evening and would begin to heat by dawn. Green hops in a heap do not wait. They warm from the middle, and then they sour, and by 9 in the morning they are compost with a smell that will not come out of a barn for a year. The Duke came into the yard at a run with his shirt half on. "Tell me." "Cowl's fast. The fire's coming back on the load. I am going up." "You are not going up. You are the only person on this place who can save what is on that floor." He had a rope off the wall already. "Where is the bearing?" "Under the collar. Iron pin. It wants driving back and greasing, and it wants somebody's weight on the vane to swing it. and the tiles are rotten on the north side, so keep off the north side." "Rotten how?" "Rotten like a man goes through them," said Marjorie. "Take the bar." He went up the ladder to the barn roof, and along the ridge and across onto the cone of the roundel, with a rope round his waist and the other end round the stack, and Ned stood at the foot with his hands over his mouth. Marjorie did not watch him. She went up her own stairs into the smoke with a wet cloth round her face and began the only thing there was to do, which was to get the load moving. She raked it into windrows to break the smoke out of it. Then she began to shift it off the floor all together with the scuppet, 42 bushels of half-dried hops, load after load, onto the cooling floor next door, where the smoke would lift off them in the air, working at the far end first, so that what was worst tainted came out first, and there is no way to make that sound as long as it is. It is a shovel and a floor, and a woman on her own at 2 in the morning, and every time she stood upright, her lungs went in and out like a bellows with grit in it. Above her, on the outside of the roundel, in the dark, a man she had told not to go on the north side lay along the cone with his boots braced on a batten and drove an iron pin back through a bearing he could not see with his hands over his head. The cowl went round on the third blow. She heard it. The whole roundel changed its note like a room when a door opens, and the draught came back up past her face, and the smoke went off the load and out of the top in one long breath. He came down through the door in the wall with his hands black and one sleeve gone at the shoulder. "What now?" "Now we get it all back and level, and I fire her low for 2 hours, and then you and Ned bring me the green out of the barn." "You cannot dry both." "I can dry both if nobody stops to talk to me about it." He did not talk to her about it. He went into the fire hole, which he had not gone into in 3 years, and he drew the fire down and raked it out flat and set new charcoal by hand with a bar, and he did it correctly because he had been born in a hop parish and had watched it done 1,000 times as a boy, and when he came out his face was the colour of the brick, and he stood for a moment with his hand on the wall. They worked until the sky went grey behind the elms. At 6:30, she cut a sample out of the middle of the first load and rubbed it in her palms in the cold morning light and put her face down into her hands and breathed it, and Ned and the Duke stood there like men waiting on a jury. "There is a shade of it in the bottom corner," she said. "The rest is clean. 10 pockets of it." Nobody cheered. She sat down on the step with her legs shaking and the scuppet across her knees. The Duke sat down 4 feet away and put his head back against the brick, and the two of them watched the light come up over 14 acres of hop garden, and neither said anything, and it was not a silence with anything missing in it. "Now, before that day gets any further along, where are you tonight, and is it warm where you are, or is it the sort of night that wants a fire? Stay with us a while. There is a good deal of this yet to come, and the best of it is not the part you would expect." On the Sunday, which is the one day nobody picks, she walked the top garden with him to look at the poles that would want replacing in the spring, and they got to the end of the row and turned and walked back down it again, which was not necessary, and then walked it a 3rd time. "My mother has written to a family in Herefordshire," he said, "about a daughter. That is what mothers do. She is a perfectly good woman, and there is nothing wrong with her at all." "Then you should say something better about her than that," said Marjorie, "if you are going to say anything." He stopped and looked up into the bines. "Say the thing about the 6 days," he said, "when the yellow turns. You know it now. I like to hear it said properly." Mr. Standish came on the Wednesday in a gig with yellow wheels. He was 50 and neat, and he had been agent in 3 counties for a borough factoring house for 22 years, and he had the particular gift of being pleasant in a way that made other people feel hurried. He drank the dowager's tea. He admired the picker's shelter. He walked the gardens with the Duke and put out his hand and touched a cone without opening it, and then he came into the oast yard and made his offer standing up so that it would sound like a small thing. "The whole crop standing," he said. "Now, today, a price on the paper, and my house carries the risk of the rest of the season, the weather, the wind, the whole of it. Your Grace has had 2 bad years. You will not get a better night's sleep for less money anywhere in England." "The price is low," said the Duke. "The price is what your name is worth in the borough, and I say that as your friend and I have said worse things to better men. Corverdale graded poor in the year of the fire and poor the year after. A sample goes on a bench with 40 others, and no buyer in that room cares whose grandfather planted what." He let that sit. "And there is the other thing, which I would rather say out here than in front of her Grace." "Say it." "You have a woman on your kiln. I have a dryer on my kiln." "You have a woman on your kiln," said Standish comfortably, "and it has been in the borough this fortnight, and men laugh at it, and a man who is laughed at gets 3 pence less on the 100-weight and is never told why. I am not a hard man about it. I am telling your Grace the shape of the world." "Then the world may laugh," said the Duke, "and I will keep my crop." Standish came to the Oast alone at 6 o'clock, when he knew where she would be, and stood at the bottom of the outside stair with his hat in his hand. "Mrs. Hallowes, or is it Miss?" "It is Hallowes. I have been trying all afternoon to think where I had the name, and it came to me in the lane." He smiled up at her. "Bearstead. 9 years ago, and again the year after. You were under dryer there when my house had the buying of it." Marjorie came down 2 steps and no more. "I was. A fine crop at Bearstead, graded well, graded better than it dried some seasons." He turned his hat round by the brim. "And there was a head dryer there, a Kentish man, older, very sound, Pascoe, Job Pascoe. Turned off in the end for a fraud on a pocket and never got another kiln, and I believe he ended up on the roads with a scythe. A sad business for a man of 60. There was talk at the time that the fraud was not his at all, but you cannot try a thing on talk. The evening was very warm and very still, and the cowl did not move at all. What is it you want, Mr. Standish?" "I want the crop," he said, without any change in his voice whatever. "And I want your Grace to be sensible, and he is not going to be sensible while there is somebody on this place telling him his hops are worth what they are worth. So I will tell you what is going to happen, and I tell you because you are a woman of the trade, and there is no sense in being coy with the trade. A sample will go on a bench in the borough with the name Corverdale on the pocket it came out of, and when that sample is looked at, somebody will ask who dried it, and I shall say, in my sorrow, that they had a woman on the kiln, and that she came from a house in Kent where the same thing was done, and that I said nothing at the time and have never forgiven myself." He put his hat on. "You said nothing at the time either. That is the beauty of it, Mrs. I have carried it 9 years, and it has cost me nothing, and it will cost you everything, and neither of us will have said a single untrue word." He got into the gig with the yellow wheels and drove out of the yard at a walk because it was a hot evening and he was not a man in any hurry. She worked until 11, and then she went and sat on the step of the burnt roundel in the dark and let herself look at it once, all the way, without turning her face away from any part of it. The night was warm, and there was thunder somewhere over the hills to the west, not coming any nearer, only lighting the cloud from inside every half-minute and saying nothing. The gardens smelled of resin and dust, and the day's heat coming up out of the ground. She was 26, she was plain, and she had known it since she was 11, when an aunt had said it across her head to another woman as a fact that needed settling. She had a trade, which is more than most women have, and no money, and no people since her father went, and she had come to this valley 6 weeks ago with a box and a roll of tools, and she had let herself want something. That was the whole of the trouble, and she named it plainly to herself, sitting on the burnt step. She wanted him, not the title, which was a lot of trouble and a leaking roof. Him, the man who had gone up on the north side of a roof he had been told to keep off, and who wanted the word for the yellow dust said again properly, and who laughed like a man out of practice. And she went through it, the way she went through a load, corner by corner, and she found no part of it that would carry weight. He was kind to her because she was useful, and she was more useful to him at this minute than any other person alive. He was kind to her because a man had died on that floor at his word, and every plank she stood on reminded him of it, and a debt like that is paid out in mended doors and new hinges and bolts on the inside, and it is paid to whoever happens to be standing where the dead man stood. And when the crop was in and the pockets were away, his mother would write another letter to Herefordshire, and there would be a perfectly good woman with nothing wrong with her at all and £8,000, and the roof of the burnt roundel would be paid for out of her father's money, and that was not a wicked thing but the ordinary arithmetic of a house with debts. And there was the last part, which she made herself say to herself in words. She was the dryer. That was what she was in this valley. There is no story in which the dryer goes in to dinner. She sat a while longer. She did not cry, or not to speak of, and she did not decide anything, because there was nothing to decide. Then she got up and went in, because there was a load on the floor that would want turning at midnight, whatever else was true, and she turned it. Standish came back at 9 the next morning with a second gentleman and a letter, and he did it in the yard, in front of the pickers going out, which was a choice and not an accident. "I am sorry to do this here," he said, and he sounded sorry. "It cannot wait for a drawing room." A sample was drawn on Monday from a pocket stencilled with the name of this estate and the parish and the year, as the law requires. This is it. He unfolded the linen bag and held it open. "There is a foreign hop mixed through it, not Golding, not grown in this county, I should say, and there is a good deal of it, and it is mixed through the body of the pocket where a buyer does not look. That is not a mistake, Your Grace. Nobody does that with a fork by accident. That is a fraud on the buyer, and it is done in your name and under your stencil, and it is a matter for a magistrate." The yard had stopped. 400 people with pokes on their shoulders, and Amos Yeo at the gate with the tally book, and Dorcas Bicknell in the second wagon with her hands wrapped, all of them standing still in the sun. "Who drew the sample?" said Marjorie. "My man drew it, as my man draws 40 a week in this county. Then your man will not mind saying so in front of the buyers on Friday, when they are all in one room and there are candles to see by." "I have no difficulty with Friday," said Standish. "None at all." And he smiled at her because she had walked exactly where he had put the gate. Then there was a silence in the yard, and it went on, and every person in it was looking at one man. "Mrs. Hallowes," said the Duke, "give me the keys of the oast until tonight." She looked at him. It was not much. It was not an accusation, and afterwards half the people there would say he had done the only thing a man in his position could do. He held out his hand, and she took the ring off her belt and put the keys into it, and the iron was warm from her body, and he closed his fingers on it, and she went back up the outside stair without a word, and the pickers went out to the gardens, and the day went on. He carried those keys in his coat pocket for 9 hours, and he could feel them there the whole time like a stone in a boot. So the candles were lit twice in the long dining room at Corverdale on the Friday, and the buyers came from Worcester and 2 from the borough, and the little linen bag lay open on the cloth in front of Mr. Standish with its mouth folded back. He had been talking for some minutes, pleasantly, without haste. He had not once raised his voice or said a word that could be written down and held against him. Sample, stencil, parish and year. A house that has had 2 bad seasons. A woman on the kiln, and one is sorry to say it, but there is a history in Kent. The Dowager Duchess of Corvedale set down her glass and looked at the woman standing in the doorway in her working clothes with the hop dust to her elbows. "She is not what we ordered," his mother said. The Duke put both hands flat on the cloth. Then he pushed back his chair, and the legs of it barked on the boards, and he stood up, and every face in the room came round to him. He walked the length of that table past all of them, and past his mother, and stopped in front of Marjorie Hallowes, and offered her his arm. "Come and stand where they can hear you," he said. She put her hand on his sleeve, because that is how it is done, and he walked her up the room to the head of the table and stood her at his own right hand and let go and stepped back and said nothing else at all. "I will say the true part first," said Marjorie, "because it is true, and because that man will say it after me otherwise, and it will sound worse in his mouth." She put her hands on the back of the chair in front of her. "I was under dryer at a house at Bearstead in Kent for 6 years. In my 3rd year there, I saw a foreign hop mixed into a pocket in that yard, and I knew what it was, and I knew whose it was, and it was not mine, and it was not the head dryer's. The head dryer was Joe Pascoe. He was 61, and he had been on that kiln since he was a boy. He was turned off for it. He lost his cottage, and he lost his character, which is worse, and no man in Kent would give him a floor after it, and I have heard he is alive, and I have heard he is not." Nobody in the room moved. I said nothing. Not to the family, not to the factor, not to anybody in the trade. I said nothing for 2 seasons, and then I left and took a good place on the strength of a reference from that same house. I was 20. That is not a reason. It is only the age I was. A man was ruined, and I kept my situation, and I have known every day since what I bought with it. She let that stand until it had gone all the way down the table. "Now the hops." She reached out and turned the linen bag with one finger so that its mouth was to the candles. "Take a cone out of that, any of you. Look at the length of it. Look at the strig, the little stem, that is near an inch. Open it and put the seed on your thumbnail. It is hard as grit, and there are a dozen of them. That is a coarse hop off a heavy soil, and it was bred to fill a pocket, and I would say it never grew within 40 miles of this house." She turned to the door and put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled, which no woman had ever done in that room, and Dorcas Bicknell came in from the passage carrying a whole green bine over her shoulder with the cones still on it, and walked up the room in her picking boots with everybody looking at her, and laid it down the middle of the tablecloth among the glasses. "There," said Marjorie. "That came off a pole in the bottom garden 20 minutes ago. That is a golding, small, tight, short in the strig, and the seed is soft in the thumb. There is nothing else planted on this estate, and there has been nothing else planted here for 60 years, and 460 people have had these cones in their hands for 3 weeks, 12 hours a day. Ask any one of them. They are all standing in the yard. I can't read a word," said Dorcas Bicknell loudly to the whole table, "but I've picked 30 year, and I know a hop, and that in the bag is not what we've been picking, and I'll say it to a magistrate on a book." 41 year I've measured on this ground," said Amos Yeo from the door, "and my father before me. Goldings, nothing else, not once." "And the drying," said Marjorie. "One thing more, and it is the last. Whatever is in that bag was dried hard and fast at a heat I have not once put on that kiln. The strig snaps across instead of bending, and the petal crumbles to powder in the hand. I dry slow. That is my whole reputation, and it is all I have got. That hop was never on my floor, and this house never grew it, and somebody put it in a bag with the name of this estate on it." There was a noise down the table like a room breathing out. Standish began to speak. He got as far as "one is bound to observe that a sample once drawn," and stopped because a man from the borough had picked a cone off the green bine and was holding it up beside a cone out of the linen bag, one in each hand at eye level, turning them. "I have handled hops for 22 years in this county," said Standish, and his voice was still perfectly pleasant. "And there is not a family here I have not served faithfully, and her grace will tell you, and the late Duke would have told you." He looked at the Dowager Duchess. She looked back at him with her hands in her lap and did not say one word. He looked at the 2 men from the borough. One of them was still turning the cones. Something went out of him then, standing up, in front of everybody, and it was not like a wicked man being caught. It was like a coat coming off a chair when somebody moves it, and what was underneath was a tired man of 50 in a good coat who had understood about 4 seconds before anybody else in the room that it had stopped working and was not going to start again. He sat down. He put his hands on the cloth. He did not say anything more at all. "Mr. Standish," said Marjorie. He raised his eyes. "There were 9 buyers in that room, and 2 of them bought half the hops in the borough. And one sentence from her about Bearstead in front of them would have finished him in the trade in a week, and everybody at the table knew it, and he knew it best of all. What was done in Kent stays in Kent," she said. "I have kept it this long. Go home." She began packing her tools at 3 in the morning, in the lodging over the store by one candle, rolling them into the sacking the way they had come, the scuppet handle, the twine, the little brass sample box, the salve pot, the chisel for the laths. Amos Yeo sat on the box by the door because he had come up the stair to say something and had forgotten what it was. "You'll not go." "There are 10 days of picking left, and Ned can bring the loads off, and I will write out the hours for him hour by hour, and any fool can follow it if he does not lose his nerve at the sweat." "That's not what I said." Marjorie straightened up with the twine in her hands. "I stood in a room full of people and told them what I did when I was 20, she said, "and it was the truth, and I would tell it again. But it does not come off, Amos. A thing left in the heap does not keep. It heats. Job Pascoe has been in the middle of me for 9 years going quietly sour, and I let it, because I had a good place and a reference. Now I have said it out loud in front of 9 buyers, and every one of them will remember my name and what came after it, and the first of them will tell the second by Michaelmas. His Grace won't turn you off." "No," she said. "He will not. He will keep me on out of decency. And I will stand on that floor next September and the September after, and he will bring his wife out to the yard one day to show her the oast, and I will take my hat off to her." She wound the twine and put it in the roll. "I would rather go while going is my own idea." The old man got up, both hands on the doorframe. "My son said no to a duke," he said. "I've been proud of it 3 years, and it's kept me warm, and it's kept me stupid. And I sat in that passage tonight and heard a woman say the wrong thing she'd done herself, out loud, with the county listening. There's not 4 men in England would do that." He put his hat on. "I don't know what to make of that yet. I'll tell you when I've had a think." He went down. She blew out the candle at 4 and lay on the boards in the dark with the roll of sacking beside her, and the empty roundel talked to itself through the open roof, and at some point the sky went grey. The carrier's cart came at 6:30, and the pickers were in the yard, and the Dowager Duchess was standing at the gate in a shawl over her evening gown because she had not been to bed either. The Duke came across the cobbles at a walk that turned into something faster and stopped 6 feet away, and then had nothing at all ready. "You are on the cart," he said. "I am. I took your keys." He said it to the ground, and then made himself say it to her face. "In the yard, in front of every soul on this place. And I carried them about all day, and I told myself it was the only sensible. No, that is not." He stopped and started again, worse. "I doubted you for 9 hours. Not a day, 9 hours, and I know the hour it began and the hour it stopped, and I shall have them both for the rest of my life. You gave them back. That is nothing. Anybody gives them back." He took a breath. "I am not giving an order. Not on those stairs, not in this yard, not anywhere, not ever again as long as I live. I am asking, stay. Not for the kiln. I would ask this if you never touched a hop again." His hands were open at his sides, and he did not know what to do with them. "Marjorie, stay." Behind him, at the gate, his mother heard her son use a woman's name in front of 400 people and put her hand up to her mouth. "Ask me the other thing," said Marjorie, "since we are all awake." "I have not got it in an order." "Ask it badly, then." So he asked it badly, and she said yes before he had got to the end of it, and Dorcas Bicknell let out a shriek in the second wagon that was heard in the next parish. The pockets went to the borough that October and graded, and the 2 men who had been at the table saw to it that the name of the estate was said aloud in the right room, and the money was not a fortune, but it was the first crop in 4 years that paid its own way and something over, They were married in November in the parish church, with the gardens cut back to the stumps outside and the whole valley in the pews, and Amos Yeo gave her his arm up the aisle because there was nobody else to do it, and got through it on the bad hip without once letting it show. Standish left the county before Christmas and took a place with a seed house in Shrewsbury where nobody had heard anything about him at all, and did the work honestly enough, and grew old there, and never in his life spoke of that dinner to a living soul. The brick came out of the burnt roundel through the winter, a barrow at a time, and there were more hands at it than she had ever asked for. The masons came in March. Ned went up the new stairs on the first day the fire was in and stood on the floor for a full minute with his cap in his hands before he could speak, and afterwards was insufferable about it for a fortnight. And in the September after that, with 2 kilns going and 112 pockets in the barn, the candles were lit in the long dining room at Corvedale, and the buyers came, and the Duchess came up from the Oast at 9 o'clock with her sleeves turned back and the smell of the kilns still in her hair, because there had been a load on and it would not wait for anybody's dinner. Her mother-in-law met her at the foot of the stairs and looked her over, the hop dust, the working boots, the burn on the wrist from the firehole bar. "You are not what we ordered," said the Dowager Duchess, and put out both hands and straightened her collar for her, the way a woman does for her own family. "Go in. They have been asking for you since 7. The Duke was already on his feet by the time she reached the door, and he came the length of the table past all of them and offered her his arm. Now then, when a thing has been sitting in the middle of you a long while, quietly heating, and you have got so used to the warmth of it that you would not know yourself without it, what would it take, do you suppose, to get it out of the heap and into the light where it can dry clean? Think about that tonight. And come back and sit with us again soon. The fire will be in, and there is always another load coming up from the gardens.